30 seconds. That's all a man like you is worth. The words cut through the gym so sharply that every conversation stopped at once. Even the steady rhythm of punching bags seemed to disappear beneath the sudden silence. Ashley Carter stood in the center of the polished training floor with the confidence of someone who had never been publicly challenged. Her black belt rested neatly around her waist, the embroidered gold lettering catching the bright overhead lights. Around her, dozens of students, parents, and local fitness influencers watched with eager smiles, sensing entertainment before anyone had even thrown a single move. Ashley pointed one gloved finger toward Marcus Hayes as if she had already decided the ending of the story. "Easy money," she repeated with a laugh. A few people chuckled along, others lifted their phones, ready to capture another viral moment. Marcus didn't look like someone who belonged in a martial arts showcase. His navy blue security uniform had faded from countless overnight shifts. The sleeves were slightly worn around the cuffs. His work boots carried thin traces of dust from a long day spent walking concrete hallways instead of polished training mats. Beside him stood his 10-year-old daughter, Zoe, hugging a backpack decorated with tiny planets and stars. She looked from Ashley to her father, her fingers tightening around one shoulder strap. Marcus gently rested a hand on Zoe's shoulder without taking his eyes off the woman across the room. His expression remained calm, almost unusually calm, the kind of quiet that often made people underestimate him. Ashley noticed it and mistook composure for weakness. "Come on," she called loudly enough for everyone to hear. "I thought dads were supposed to protect their kids. Show her you've got something." More laughter rolled through the crowd. Someone whispered that the security guard looked scared. Another joked that he probably couldn't tell the difference between a sparring class and a real competition. Zoe lowered her head. Marcus noticed immediately. He bent slightly toward her and spoke so softly only she could hear. "Keep breathing, sweetheart." She nodded once, trying to smile, but her eyes were already beginning to shine with embarrassment. Marcus slowly looked back toward Ashley. "We're here for my daughter's beginner class," he said evenly. Nothing more. Ashley folded her arms and smiled wider. "Then you picked the wrong day to stand in my gym." The room filled with nervous excitement. The instructor overseeing the afternoon program hesitated, but said nothing. Cameras continued recording. Every person expected the quiet father either to walk away or lose his temper. Marcus did neither. Instead, he stepped half a pace forward, placing himself naturally between Ashley and Zoe, not aggressively, not dramatically, simply like a father who understood that sometimes the strongest shield was standing still. No one noticed the tiny faded trident tattoo barely visible beneath the edge of his left sleeve as he adjusted it. No one recognized the disciplined posture hidden beneath years of ordinary life. To everyone watching, he was only a tired black single dad who had wandered into the wrong room. They believed Ashley had already won. None of them realized they were seconds away from discovering they had judged the wrong man. Marcus Hayes had long ago stopped trying to prove himself to strangers. Life had taught him that opinions formed quickly, but truth revealed itself slowly. Every weekday began before sunrise in a small 2-bedroom apartment on the edge of Charlotte, North Carolina. He prepared breakfast, packed Zoe's lunch, checked her homework, and walked her to the school bus before reporting to another long security shift. Some mornings he barely had time to finish a cup of coffee before answering his first radio call. Yet no matter how exhausted he felt, he never allowed Zoe to see it. She deserved a father who smiled first and worried later. Since her mother passed away from a sudden illness 4 years earlier, Marcus had quietly become everything for his daughter. He learned how to braid her hair by watching online tutorials late at night. He practiced making her favorite blueberry pancakes every Saturday until they finally tasted the way she remembered. When nightmares woke her after midnight, he never told her he had. Work in just a few hours. He simply sat beside her bed until she fell asleep again. That was why they had joined the community martial arts program. Zoe had been dealing with teasing at school, and her guidance counselor suggested a beginner self-defense class to help rebuild her confidence. Marcus did not care whether she ever earned a belt. He only wanted her to stand a little taller each day and believe that courage came from character, not from fear. During the first few weeks, Zoe slowly changed. She smiled more often. She made her first close friend in class. She even volunteered to read aloud during school because she finally believed people would listen. Marcus treasured those small victories far more than any trophy. But over the past month, the atmosphere inside the gym had begun to shift. Ashley Carter's growing online popularity attracted larger crowds and more cameras than families. Friendly demonstrations slowly became dramatic challenges designed to generate viral clips. Parents whispered about it in the waiting area, yet few spoke openly because Ashley brought attention and sponsorships to the facility. Marcus usually ignored the noise. He arrived 10 minutes early, sat quietly on the same wooden bench, encouraged Zoe through every lesson, and left without drawing attention. He believed discipline did not need an audience. Unfortunately, Ashley noticed him precisely because he never tried to impress anyone. She interpreted his silence as insecurity and his humility as weakness. Earlier that afternoon, she had overheard another instructor compliment Zoe's determination despite her being new. Ashley laughed and casually replied that confidence was easy when someone's father never stepped onto the mat himself. The remark earned several amused smiles, but Marcus pretended not to hear. He was there for Zoe, not for arguments. Now, standing beneath the bright lights with dozens of curious eyes fixed upon him, Marcus recognized something deeper than simple arrogance. Ashley wanted applause more than understanding. Zoe looked up at her father with anxious eyes, silently wondering whether this embarrassing moment would become another memory she wished she could erase. Marcus gave her a reassuring smile, the same calm smile that had carried them through every difficult season. He knew one choice could shape what his daughter remembered about this day for the rest of her life, and he intended to make that choice count. Marcus slowly removed his work badge from the front of his jacket and slipped it into his pocket with the same quiet care he used every evening after finishing a shift. His movements were unhurried, almost ordinary, and that only encouraged more whispers from the crowd. Several people assumed he was finally preparing to leave before embarrassing himself. Ashley tilted her head with a confident smile. "That is probably the smartest decision you have made today," she said, earning another wave of laughter from the spectators. Marcus looked at her calmly. "I did not come here to compete," he answered. "I came here because my daughter deserves a place where she can learn confidence without being mocked." His voice was steady, neither angry nor defensive, and for a brief moment the room became unexpectedly quiet. Ashley shrugged as though his words meant nothing. "Confidence has to be earned," she replied. "If she is going to admire someone, maybe she should admire a winner." Zoe lowered her eyes toward the polished floor. Marcus noticed the change immediately. He knelt beside her until they were eye level. "Look at me," he said gently. She slowly lifted her head. "Do you remember what we talked about on the drive over?" Zoe nodded faintly. "Real strength is how we treat people." Marcus smiled. "Exactly. Nobody else gets to decide your value." The little girl took a deeper breath, and although she was still nervous, the fear in her eyes softened. Around them, several parents exchanged uncomfortable glances. They had expected shouting, not quiet dignity. One mother quietly placed her phone back into her purse, no longer interested in recording what she thought would become another viral confrontation. Across the gym, Coach Daniel Brooks had been watching everything from the edge of the training area. He had coached martial arts for more than 25 years, and experience had taught him that a person's posture often revealed more than their words. There was something unusual about Marcus. His shoulders remained relaxed, his breathing never changed, and his eyes continuously tracked every movement around the room without appearing distracted. Coach Brooks narrowed his eyes, trying to remember where he had seen that level of awareness before. It certainly was not common among first-time visitors. Ashley, however, saw none of it. She stepped closer with complete confidence, leaving several feet of respectful distance, but making sure everyone could hear her. "If you refuse, people will think your daughter was right to hide behind you." Zoe looked back at her father, worried that the crowd might believe those words. Marcus stood again and gently squeezed her shoulder. "There is nothing wrong with walking away from pride," he said quietly. "But there is something wrong with teaching a child that humiliation is entertainment." Those words settled over the room like unexpected rain. Even Ashley's smile faded for the briefest instant before determination returned to her face. She folded her arms again and looked toward the audience. "Then let everyone watch," she announced. One respectful demonstration. Nothing more. Several people applauded immediately. Others remained silent, uncertain whether they were witnessing a sporting challenge or something far more personal? Coach Brooks took one slow step forward, his attention fixed on Marcus's left wrist as the sleeve of the faded security jacket shifted slightly. For only a second, the worn edge of a small trident tattoo became visible beneath the fabric. The coach's expression changed almost imperceptibly. A memory surfaced from years earlier, one he could not quite place, and a quiet thought crossed his mind. Perhaps the man standing before them had spent a lifetime avoiding attention because he understood exactly what happened when people underestimated him. The air inside the gym felt strangely heavier, as though every person had forgotten to breathe at the same time. Coach Daniel Brooks walked calmly toward the center of the training floor, raising one open hand before either Marcus or Ashley could move another. "Step. If this goes any further," he said evenly, "it will remain a controlled demonstration. Respect comes before pride in this building." Ashley nodded without hesitation. She had no doubt about the outcome. Marcus simply inclined his head. "Agreed," he replied. Coach Brooks looked from one to the other before his eyes settled on Marcus again. The quiet father standing beneath the bright lights did not look nervous. His heartbeat did not seem hurried. His breathing remained slow and steady. The coach had seen countless competitors before championship matches, and nearly every one of them carried small signs of tension. Marcus carried none. That realization lingered in the back of his mind. Around the edge of the room, spectators shifted closer. Several phones remained raised, waiting for the perfect clip to upload before the afternoon was over. Someone whispered that Ashley would probably finish the demonstration in less than half a minute. Another guessed Marcus had never stepped onto a training mat before. No one noticed Marcus quietly kneel beside Zoe once again. He straightened the loose lace on one of her sneakers before brushing a strand of hair away from her face. "Whatever happens," he said softly, "I want you to remember something." Zoe looked into her father's eyes. "People may cheer for the loudest person today, but that does not mean they are cheering for the strongest heart." She swallowed hard and nodded. "I understand, Dad." Marcus smiled warmly. "Good. Then you already won the most important lesson." Zoe managed a small smile in return. Across the room, Ashley watched the exchange with folded arms. "Still giving speeches?" she called out. "Your daughter deserves someone she can look up to." Marcus slowly stood and faced her. His expression remained calm, but there was now unmistakable conviction in his voice. "She already has someone to look up to," he answered. "She has every person who chooses kindness when humiliation would be easier." A quiet murmur spread through the parents standing along the wall. One father lowered his phone completely. Another mother exchanged an uneasy glance with her teenage son, who suddenly seemed less interested in recording the moment than before. Coach Brooks noticed the subtle change in the room. The audience was no longer watching simply to see who would appear stronger. They had begun listening. Ashley stepped onto the center mat and gestured politely, though confidence still filled every movement. "Then show everyone what kindness can do." Marcus removed his faded security jacket and folded it neatly over the back of a nearby chair. Beneath it was nothing remarkable, just a plain gray shirt worn from years of ordinary life. Yet as he rolled one sleeve back slightly, the faded trident tattoo became visible once more. Coach Brooks froze for the briefest moment. His eyes widened almost imperceptibly before narrowing in recognition. A memory returned from nearly 15 years earlier, when he had volunteered at a military rehabilitation event. One instructor had spoken about a remarkably disciplined young Navy SEAL whose greatest strength was never physical ability, but complete emotional control under pressure. Brooks looked at Marcus again, then quietly exhaled. The name had not returned to him yet, but the feeling had. Suddenly he understood why the quiet father had never once seemed interested in proving anything at all. The demonstration had not even begun, yet someone in the room had already recognized that the story everyone expected was about to take a very different turn. Coach Daniel Brooks stepped to the edge of the mat and spoke with the calm authority that came from decades of teaching. "This is a demonstration of discipline, not domination. The moment respect disappears, it ends." Both participants nodded. Ashley immediately settled into a polished stance that reflected years of formal training. Her confidence drew another wave of applause from the audience. Marcus simply stood with his feet comfortably planted on the mat, his hands relaxed at his sides, his breathing slow and almost impossible to notice. To most people watching, his posture looked ordinary. To Coach Brooks, it looked intentional. Ashley smiled as though she were about to teach an easy lesson. Last chance to walk away, she said. Nobody will blame you. Marcus answered with the same quiet voice that had never once risen throughout the afternoon. Walking away from pride is never difficult. Walking away from responsibility is. The words hung in the air longer than anyone expected. Zoe watched from the front row, her hands folded tightly together. She was still nervous, but something had changed. She no longer looked frightened for her father. She looked curious. The signal to begin was given. Ashley moved first with speed and confidence, demonstrating clean technique that earned approving nods from experienced students around the room. Marcus shifted only a small step, creating just enough space to avoid contact without appearing hurried. The movement was so subtle that several spectators barely realized he had moved at all. Ashley paused for a fraction of a second before trying again, this time changing direction with greater precision. Once again, Marcus adjusted his position with remarkable economy, never forcing the moment, never showing frustration, never attempting to embarrass her. The audience grew quieter. People expected an exchange that would settle the matter quickly. Instead, they were watching something they could not immediately explain. Ashley increased her pace, determined to demonstrate superior skill. Marcus continued responding with calm precision, his expression unchanged, his breathing steady, his attention focused not only on Ashley, but also on everything happening around the room. Coach Brooks folded his arms more tightly. The recognition in his mind became stronger with every passing second. Marcus was not reacting out of instinct alone. He was observing, calculating, and choosing the smallest possible movement every single time. That level of control was rare. A retired firefighter standing near the back quietly murmured, "He is not trying to win. He is trying to prevent anyone from getting hurt." Another parent slowly lowered a phone that had been recording since the beginning. The atmosphere inside the gym shifted from excitement to genuine curiosity. Ashley noticed the silence and mistook it for uncertainty. Determined to regain the attention of the room, she smiled toward the crowd before turning back to Marcus. "You cannot avoid forever," she said confidently. Marcus met her eyes with quiet respect. "You are right," he replied. "Eventually, every person has to choose what kind of example they leave behind." For the first time that afternoon, Ashley hesitated. It lasted only a heartbeat, but Coach Brooks saw it clearly. Confidence built on applause had encountered someone who did not measure strength by victory. Then, as Marcus calmly adjusted the sleeve of his gray shirt, the faded trident tattoo became fully visible beneath the bright lights. Coach Brooks drew in a slow breath, his eyes widening with recognition as a name finally returned to his memory, and he suddenly understood why the quiet father had seemed familiar from the very beginning. Coach Daniel Brooks felt the memory settle into place with startling clarity. Years ago, during a veterans charity event outside Norfolk, Virginia, he had watched a small group of instructors demonstrate something that had fascinated him far more than strength. They had demonstrated restraint. One of them, a quiet Navy SEAL named Marcus Hayes, had explained that the greatest victory was ending conflict without creating another one. Brooks had never forgotten the lesson, even if he had forgotten the man's face. Now the faded trident tattoo, the steady breathing, and the effortless awareness all fit together like pieces of a puzzle. His heart skipped. He looked from Marcus to Ashley, realizing they were not witnessing an ordinary demonstration at all. Ashley, however, remained unaware. She interpreted the silence surrounding them as admiration for her own confidence. She smiled toward the audience, expecting encouragement, but the applause never came. Instead, people watched with growing curiosity. The room that had been loud only minutes earlier now echoed only with the soft hum of fluorescent lights and the distant rhythm of an air conditioner. Marcus remained exactly where he stood, shoulders relaxed, eyes calm, waiting patiently for Ashley to make her next decision rather than forcing one himself. Zoe sat quietly on the front bench with both hands wrapped around the straps of her backpack. She had stopped worrying about whether her father would be embarrassed. Instead, she noticed something she had seen many times before at home. It was the same peaceful expression he wore while helping her solve difficult math homework or teaching her how to ride a bicycle without becoming frustrated. The gym suddenly felt less like a competition and more like another lesson. Ashley slowly lowered her hands for a moment, confused by Marcus's complete lack of aggression. Why are you not trying to prove yourself? She asked before she could stop herself. Marcus smiled gently. Because the people who know who they are rarely need to announce it. Those simple words landed more heavily than anyone expected. Several parents exchanged thoughtful glances. One teenage student quietly removed the phone from his recording stand and slipped it into his pocket, suddenly realizing that what mattered was happening in front of him, not on a screen. Coach Brooks stepped forward one careful pace. "Marcus," he said softly, almost testing the name against an old memory. Marcus turned with quiet recognition and offered the coach a respectful nod. Brooks exhaled slowly. There was no doubt anymore. "I remember you," he said. "You came here years ago with the military outreach program. You spent an entire afternoon teaching children that discipline begins with kindness." Marcus gave a modest smile. "That was a long time ago. Some lessons deserve to last," Brooks replied. Ashley looked between the two men, her confidence beginning to crack beneath a growing sense of uncertainty. She had expected to face an ordinary father protecting his daughter. Instead, she was beginning to understand that the quiet man before her had spent years mastering something far greater than winning. The spectators sensed the shift even before anyone explained it. The atmosphere changed from anticipation to reflection. Nobody cared anymore about who could impress the crowd. They wanted to understand the man who had remained humble while carrying a past he had never mentioned. Marcus glanced toward Zoe, whose nervous smile had finally become genuine. In that single moment, he knew the lesson she would remember for the rest of her. Life had already begun long before anyone discovered who he truly was. Ashley Carter stood motionless for several seconds, her confidence quietly giving way to uncertainty. She had spent years believing that every challenge could be measured by speed, precision, or public approval. Yet the man standing across from her seemed completely untouched by any of those things. The crowd noticed it as well. Nobody was cheering anymore. The phones that had been raised to capture a humiliating moment now remained lowered at people's sides. Coach Daniel Brooks slowly stepped beside Marcus, his voice carrying naturally across the silent gym. "Some of you are wondering why this demonstration feels different," he said. "It is because you are not watching someone who learned discipline to defeat people. You are watching someone who learned discipline to protect them." The words settled deeply into the room. Ashley looked at Marcus with genuine confusion. "Why did you never tell anyone?" she asked quietly. Marcus answered without hesitation. "Because my past is not the most important thing about me. My daughter is." Zoe felt warmth spread across her face as she looked up at her father. For years she had known him only as the man who packed her lunches, attended every parent conference, worked long overnight shifts, and still found enough energy to read another bedtime story. She had never imagined there was another chapter to his life that he never spoke about. Coach Brooks nodded slowly. "Marcus Hayes served as a Navy SEAL for many years," he explained. "The greatest lesson he shared with young athletes was never about winning. It was about walking away whenever pride was the only thing left to defend." A ripple of surprise moved through the audience. Several parents looked at Marcus with entirely different eyes. One older veteran, standing near the entrance, quietly placed his hand over his heart in silent respect. A teenage student whispered, "He could have told everyone from the beginning." His father answered softly, "That is exactly why he did not." Ashley lowered her eyes for the first time that afternoon. The applause she had always chased suddenly felt meaningless, compared to the quiet respect surrounding Marcus. She replayed every word she had spoken since he entered the gym. Every joke, every assumption, every moment she had mistaken humility for weakness. None of it reflected the person she believed herself to be. Marcus noticed the change in her expression before anyone else did. Instead of taking satisfaction in her discomfort, he simply said, "People make mistakes. What matters is what they choose after they recognize them." Ashley slowly looked back at him. "After everything I said, you are still giving me grace?" Marcus smiled gently. "Someone once gave it to me when I needed it most." The silence that followed felt almost sacred. Sunlight streamed through the tall front windows, stretching across the polished floor until it reached the edge of the training mat where both of them stood. Zoe watched the light touch her father's shoes and suddenly understood why he had always told her that strength was quiet. It did not need to announce itself because it revealed itself through character. Ashley removed one glove and held it in both hands, no longer as a symbol of victory, but as a reminder of the lesson she had just learned. Around the room, People realized they had arrived expecting entertainment, but were leaving with something far more valuable. For the first time that afternoon, nobody saw Marcus Hayes as the quiet security guard in a faded uniform. They saw a father whose greatest achievement was not the uniform he once wore, but the example he chose to live every single day. For several long seconds, nobody moved. The gym that had echoed with laughter earlier now held only quiet reflection. Ashley Carter looked down at the glove still resting in her hands, then slowly walked toward Marcus Hayes. Every step felt heavier than the last, because she knew the hardest part was no longer admitting she had been wrong. The hardest part was saying it aloud in front of everyone who had watched. She stopped a few feet away and met Marcus's calm eyes. "I owe you an apology," she said, her voice steady but noticeably softer than before. "Not because of who you were before today, but because of how I treated you today. I judged you before I knew anything about you. I made assumptions about your job, your family, and your character. I forgot the very values martial arts was supposed to teach me." The room remained completely silent. Marcus listened without interrupting. He did not look proud, satisfied, or victorious. He simply listened. Ashley then turned toward Zoe. The little girl instinctively held her father's hand, unsure what would happen next. Ashley lowered herself until she was at Zoe's eye level. "I am sorry for embarrassing you," she said sincerely. "No child should ever have to watch someone disrespect a parent. I hope one day you can forgive me." Zoe glanced at Marcus. He gave a small, reassuring nod. She looked back at Ashley and answered honestly, "My dad says people can become better when they tell the truth." Ashley smiled sadly. "Your dad is right." Coach Daniel Brooks quietly folded his arms, unable to hide the pride in his expression. This was the lesson he had hoped every student would one day understand. Belts, medals, and trophies could recognize skill, but only character earned trust. Marcus finally spoke. "An apology means something when it is followed by action." Ashley nodded immediately. "Then I want to begin today." She turned toward the parents and students gathered around the mat. "I built too much of my reputation on proving I was stronger than someone else. From now on, every beginner who walks into this gym deserves encouragement before criticism." Several parents exchanged surprised smiles. One by one, people who had laughed earlier slowly began applauding, not for a victory on the mat, but for the humility they had just witnessed. Coach Brooks stepped beside Ashley and placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "That is the first lesson every true martial artist keeps learning," he said. Marcus reached for the faded security jacket hanging neatly over the chair and slipped it back on without ceremony. He checked the time on his old wristwatch and smiled at Zoe. "We still have time to stop for ice cream before homework," he said. Zoe laughed for the first time all afternoon. "Can we get chocolate?" "Chocolate it is," Marcus replied. As they began walking toward the exit, several students instinctively stepped aside, creating a quiet path without anyone asking them to. The respect that followed Marcus was no longer built on the discovery that he had once been a Navy SEAL. It came from something much greater. Every person in that room had witnessed a father choose humility over pride, kindness over humiliation, and grace over revenge, and they understood that those choices would be remembered far longer than any demonstration ever could. The late afternoon sun settled low across the parking lot, washing the pavement in soft golden light as Marcus Hayes and Zoe walked quietly toward their aging pickup truck. The noise from the gym faded behind them until only the gentle rustle of leaves and the distant sound of children laughing in a nearby park remained. Marcus unlocked the passenger door and waited while Zoe climbed inside, just as he had done every day for years. Before closing the door, she looked up at him with thoughtful eyes. "Dad?" she asked softly. "Why did you never tell me you were a Navy SEAL?" Marcus smiled as he rested one hand on the roof of the truck. "Because that was only one chapter of my life," he answered. "Being your father is the chapter one I'm proudest of." Zoe looked at him for a long moment before wrapping her arms around him in a quiet hug. "I think I understand now," she whispered. Marcus gently returned the embrace. "I hope you remember something much more important than what happened inside that gym today." She stepped back and nodded. "That being strong is not about making someone else feel small." Marcus smiled warmly. "Exactly." A few minutes later, as they sat together inside a small neighborhood ice cream shop, the ordinary sounds of spoons against glass cups and families sharing conversations filled the room. Nothing about the place suggested that one of its customers had once served in one of the most demanding military units in the country. Marcus preferred it that way. Across town, Coach Daniel Brooks locked the doors of the gym after the last students left. Before turning off the lights, he removed a framed sign from the lobby wall that simply read, "Victory demands respect." He carried it into the training room and replaced it with a new message he wrote by hand before hanging it where every student would see it upon entering. It read, "Character earns respect before skill ever can." Ashley Carter returned early the next morning. There were no cameras waiting, no audience, and no applause. She greeted every new student personally, especially the beginners who looked nervous walking through the front door. When a shy little boy apologized for making mistakes during his first lesson, Ashley knelt beside him and smiled gently. "Everyone starts somewhere," she said. Coach Brooks watched from across the room without saying a word. He knew real change rarely arrived with loud promises. It revealed itself through small choices repeated every day. Several weeks later, Zoe tied on her first new belt during class. She searched the room until she found her father standing quietly near the back, still wearing the same faded security jacket after another overnight shift. Marcus applauded no louder than anyone else, but the pride in his eyes needed no words. As father and daughter walked home beneath the warm evening sky, their shadows stretched side by side across the sidewalk, neither one leading the other for very long. The world would probably never remember the quiet afternoon when a crowd discovered who Marcus Hayes had once been. But Zoe would remember something far greater for the rest of her life. She would remember the day her father proved that the strongest people are not the ones who demand respect. They are the ones who quietly live in a way that inspires it.